Okay, welcome everybody to our Rowing Canada coaching webinar this week. We have Dane Lawson and Cassidy Deane here, and I'd like to, I'm going to introduce them in a minute, speaking about developing technique and thinking outside the box. I'm Colleen Miller, manager of Coach Education and Development, and as you can see, we've jazzed up our backgrounds today. It's pretty exciting. So you'll have to focus on the speakers because we're working on that. First of all, I'd like to introduce Dane. And Dane was a coxswain starting out in Brockville in 2004 and then started coaching in 2008 in Brockville. He also coached at Purdue University in Indiana and also coached at the Junior Worlds in 2016 and has coached for Canada as an under 23 coach for the past 2 years. Dane has also coached at Argonaut Rowing Club, and he is based out of London, Ontario at the Rowing Canada NextGen Hub there, and works with a lot of NextGen athletes at Western and in that region. So one of Dane's athletes that he works with is Cassidy, and she originally started as a novice at Queen's University in her second year, and then rowed for 2 years varsity, and now she's doing grad school at Western in sport management, and also was part of the FISU team, the women's 8 crew in 2018, representing Canada. So thank you both for being here today. And we have 52 participants on, which is exciting. As normal, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We will endeavor to answer them as best as possible. And we have 45, 50 minutes here for this webinar. It will be placed on our Rowing Canada website following, so you can watch the recording following that. And I will hand it over to Dane. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Colleen. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. We're going to run through a couple things today, but the main kind of outline will be through a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so I think we're up and running. So just generally the topic, and I want to start out with asking a question is like, do your athletes get it? So in this presentation, we're going to kind of talk about what it is. And we want to think specifically in terms of technique. So how do we develop it, and how do we think of unique strategies for delivering technique? So just kind of a question is, how many times do we struggle with developing our athletes rowing, or even just like a specific skill? And let's think about some reasons why we may struggle. Overall, what we're looking to do is just be responsive and thoughtful in our coaching practice. Okay. So goals for today. Some of the content may be intuitive, and hopefully you can recognize aspects of what we're talking about in your coaching practice. We want to be able to name what we do, detail the process, and then help you develop it further to make a real impact in your coaching. So one of these concepts is pedagogy, how we teach. And then, as we'll kind of speak about, we need learners to be active participants, not just passive bystanders left to absorb information. So as we go, we're actually going to develop a unique coaching framework for each coach that's on the call. So if you do not have a pen and paper in front of you, I would ask that you go get some right now. So I'm just going to time kind of 20 seconds to get everyone situated, and then we'll kind of continue on. So hopefully people are finding some writing utensils to work with, I think it's important to have that pen and paper copy in front of you. And then kind of in the second half, it's going to be the third part of the webinar, we're going to look at practical examples and some stuff that we've worked through with Cassidy here at Western. And we want to explore how to create better learning environments. Okay, so just a couple words about Cassidy. So number one, she is not the biggest athlete that we have at Western, but really great work ethic, very skilled in the boat and when it comes to general movement patterns, and really driven about how to improve her rowing. She's one of the people that asks the most demanding questions of the coaches and is ready to kind of engage in like dialogue with the coach. So she's very much like an active participant in her own development. So she is going to act as a demonstrator when we create our individual frameworks. And then, as I mentioned, she's going to share her experiences as an athlete. So we're going to hear from Cassidy just a little bit later. Okay, we should be able to go through some of this stuff pretty quickly. So the first topic is just kind of exploring like pedagogy. What is it? So just kind of a simple definition, the study of how knowledge and skills are imparted in an educational context. The main thing we want to realize is that there is a process to teaching, and that process is kind of the pedagogy. It can be studied and evaluated as to if it accomplishes its intended output. So the second thing, coaches are the reservoir of knowledge. We are teachers. We have hopefully all of the information that's needed, and we need a process to communicate that with athletes. If the athletes are not doing it, it's your fault. So this was just a really kind of great quote, and it's kind of the way that like I envision coaching. So, you know, athletes learn through different methods. They begin at different places and they develop at different rates. So there's not a formula to follow, but we need to unlock the potential of athletes. So even if we don't have all of the information ourselves, especially if you're like newer to coaching and you're not as comfortable and don't have as much experience, we need to figure out how to get the athletes the information that they need. And I think a really important point is that just because we want to create the environment for the athletes, we want to shift ownership of their rowing to the athletes themselves. So we have a bit of a paradox. We need to take ownership of like what it is that is the end product, but we also need athletes that are very capable and independent themselves. So we want to think about more strategies for facilitated learning that helps the skill sets of the athletes develop kind of independent from a coach. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about a little bit more today as well. And then kind of what you guys need to get as coaches is that the methods that you're teaching with are just as important as the information. So if we have the sole responsibility of downloading the information, so this is the instruction of you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this as our method of communication to the athlete, we can't possibly hope to deliver everything that the athlete needs. We just like don't have the time. We don't have all the answers. We have limited attention span. We're limited by our coaching communication skills, athlete movement restrictions. There's just a whole host. We cannot take all of the information that the coach has and download that to the athlete. So we'll actually move on to the next point here. Okay, so I think it's fairly common to kind of be familiar with this like phrase, experience is the best teacher. So we want to think about ways we can create more meaningful experiences in our regular training. So one of the ways that we want to do this is shifting the ratio. So this is the ratio between who is doing the thinking. So whether it's the teacher or in this case, the athlete. One of the ways we want to do this is by asking meaningful and very demanding questions. So I think like the most common one is kind of like we pull up to a crew after maybe doing a piece or rowing for a period of time. We say, so how's it going so far? And number one, the coaches need to know how it's going. So we should be able to look at the product that is happening in the rowing, and we should already know. And then stock questions are going to lead to stock answers. So it's going to be, you know, pretty good. And we're not going to delve into like the real meaningful things that will facilitate a change. We want to really get demonstration. So there may be a demonstration component that you incorporate into your coaching. So you're actually demonstrating the movements using your hands or the motions. But then we also want to flip that back to the athlete and ask for demonstration. So if we're asking for something specific to happen, it's a very useful strategy to have them demonstrate before they row away and make sure that they've understood kind of the instruction. Encourage dialogue with peers. So this is another strategy for shifting that ratio. We want to think about allowing the space to come up with meaningful answers to our questions, and they may not have the answers, but someone in their crew might. So even just a quick example, like this is something that develops teamwork. It creates an idea that we're working on the same things. And it also really gets at the athlete's perspective, because what we experience as coaches is actually quite a bit different than what the athletes are experiencing in the boat. And we want to think about ways to create competition. So when we're incorporating skills, we want to be able to measure it. And one of the ways is through competition. So it's either, you know, side by side with someone else, or, you know, skill-based timing for 30 seconds. How many repetitions can they do correctly? Rowing with their blades off the water without hitting. We want to think about fun ways to engage the athlete to demonstrate their abilities. So just limitations. We're really limited by our communication skills. So we can think that we're delivering the right content, but if that hasn't really processed with the athlete, the content and the information that's being passed along isn't meaningful. So we want to really think about ways that we can transfer the information. So again, like if an athlete's really tired, they're not going to be able to take in feedback as well as if they're fresh. They could just be tuned out, grabbing their water bottle, and miss a really key piece of communication. And then the coach has communicated that and doesn't recognize that the athlete has missed that, then they could move on and never circle back to what that point was. And then that point just becomes lost. So we also want to recognize if the athletes can actually execute the skill that you're working on. So early in my coaching days, I had the Rowing Canada women's coach, Phil Marshall, out in the coach boat with me. I was asking questions about what we were working on, and one of the athletes was working on getting hinged forward. And Phil kind of like looked at me, he's like, well, can the athlete hinge forward? And I kind of got thinking about it. We tested it on land and didn't have the hip mobility to actually be able to hinge. So it doesn't matter how much we're working on that skill, if they can't do it in the boat, they're not going to be able to do it. So we needed to address it off the water. Recognizing what the athlete perceives, because again, it's different from the coach. So like last week on this technical call or technical webinar, Max Latimer was talking about blade depth, and they got video from the World Rowing Championships last year and realized that they were digging their blades like a lot during the stroke. Didn't feel like that to them. They felt like they were really linear. They were able to make the turn at the front end and keep those blades buried and have good blade work. But what they were perceiving wasn't what was actually happening. So that kind of brings me to when we have limitations and we have to think critically about the program or about what the problem is, we are stuck. And we want to use this as something that benefits our coaching. So it forces us to come at the problem in new and unique ways. And that's where we really start to develop as a coach, is thinking about unique opportunities to solve certain problems that we're in. So this period of getting stuck is actually critically important. And we want to really wrestle with what are the things that we can do to solve this. Okay, so we're going to explore a couple questions. So we're going to kind of put Cassidy to work now. So we're going to explore these questions together. What I'd like you as coaches to do now is start to develop some of your own ideas, and don't worry if the answers to your questions don't line up with what Cassidy comes up with, or don't worry if they're necessarily right or wrong. The great thing about creating a framework is that there's time to review and edit after the presentation. And it's just a way of just getting some thoughts on paper about where you're at with your coaching. Okay, so what is it that the athletes need to get? Kind of my first question is, what is the goal of rowing? So maybe you find yourself at the start of a 2K rowing race. What is the task that needs to be accomplished during a race? And I'm kind of saying a race because presumably that is one of the main reasons why we row. So I'm just going to ask Cass to write down her thoughts on what is the goal of rowing. And this is going to be kind of the highest tier. So we're going to actually take like 15 or 20 seconds to write down your response, top of the page in the middle of what you have in front of you. So I think Cass has just finished. We're going to give it another couple seconds so you guys can write down your thoughts. What is the goal of rowing? Okay. Cass, do you want to share what yours is and hold it up to the screen, please?
So I put that the objective of a 2K, it can kind of go two ways. So the objective that you can have is to have the best race possible, but the other option or the other objective can be to win. So I don't think either are wrong, because I think it depends on what you as an athlete are trying to accomplish with the race that you're going into.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So like Cass said, a couple ways you can go. Competition isn't wrong, but we want to make sure that we respect competition for what it is. It's not a measure of people's value. It's just a demonstration of rowing ability. But for those that are competitive, that can be a portion of it. For me, it's definitely how we can move the boat the fastest over a set distance. So we just want to think about, were you more oriented towards creating boat speed or more towards winning the race? And are there factors that you can or can't control by opting for one of those? So the second question, what does the boat actually do during rowing? I couldn't figure out a way to kind of direct this any better, so I'm kind of going to lecture on this one. While you're racing, the boat doesn't stay at a constant speed. Throughout the stroke cycle, it's speeding up and slowing down, speeding up and slowing down. So what we want to do is create branches off of our level 1. And Cassidy is going to just draw that out for us and demonstrate what hers looks like. But the main thing that we have to do is we have to generate boat speed, and then we have to maintain it during each stroke cycle. Okay, and Cass, if you can just hold that up when you're done with it. So we just ask that everyone kind of put that as their second tier.
Okay, so for generating and maintaining boat speed, in terms of generating, I put down applying power and correct sequencing. And then for maintaining boat speed, I put letting the hull run under you and relaxation on the recovery.
Okay, so you're just one step ahead of us here, Cass, but that's okay.
Oh.
So we want to actually give this back to the coaches now. So just like Cass demonstrated there, we're going to take 30 seconds to develop 1 or 2 principles that generate boat speed. So if you'd like, you can copy Cass's, but that doesn't really encourage the critical thinking aspect. So we'd like to give you 30 seconds for you to think about what are 1 or 2 principles that generate boat speed. Okay, and just kind of a second point is 1 to 2 points about what we can do to maintain speed. So we just want to watch, especially in this one, that we don't just list a synonym for maintaining boat speed. So we really need to think about what is a principle that will allow us to maintain speed. So Cass, could you just repeat the ones that you gave?
The 2 that I highlighted were letting the boat run under you and relaxation on the recovery.
Okay, so that's 30 seconds for each. So hopefully you guys are completing that framework. So the main thing that I would kind of like to get out of this is, if we asked most of our athletes to describe what is rowing, even after like 1 or 2 days involved in the sport, they would probably tell us about the catch and the finish position. They would talk about the sequence on the drive, which is like legs, body, arms, and then it's kind of the reverse on the recovery, arms, body, legs. So if they can describe what that is on day 2, yes, they may lack some of the skills for it, but why is it that people that have been involved in the sport for years and years still struggle with getting this sequence right? And when we operate within a framework rather than just trying to move through positions, we can think about, what does it feel like to move the boat? What does it feel like to go really fast? What does it feel like to get the rhythm right? So once we have these principles established, we can frame our coaching and our rowing in terms of those principles and see how they contribute to our goal of boat speed. So especially when we're racing, like, we don't have time to think about what is the sequence that we need to take. The arms away, the body over, the getting prepared for the catch, putting the blade in the water. There's just too much going on. We think tactics. We think about, is the load heavy? What is the coxswain saying? There's just so much at play in races that we can't be thinking just positioning. So yes, muscle memory becomes a big component, but we need to think about very quickly and very succinctly, how do we generate boat speed? Okay, so now comes, I guess, like the part of the presentation that gets more thinking outside the box. So we're going to continue to develop our framework, but once we kind of have this framework in place of, moving the boat fast, generating and maintaining boat speed, and then some key principles, we need to be messaging what those principles are at every session. So every session we run, we are thinking very, very concrete terms that the athletes can understand and that they can latch onto. Is your sequence correct? Is one of the ones Cass had. I think it's not one of the ones on my coaching framework, but the power application definitely is. Is the athlete rowing powerfully? Okay. So I'm hoping that Cass can hop back on now and just detail a little bit about when she was starting at Queen's, what was it that she was doing on a day-to-day basis? And just a reminder, Cass, that your mic is muted right now.
So basically, beginning the novice program at Queen's, we took a lot of time off the water to learn the foundations of rowing. So for the first week, I believe it was, we just practiced putting the boat properly in the water, sitting in the boat, taking the oars out, bringing the boat back to the boathouse. And then we would do some technique on the erg. So it was slow at the beginning, but building that foundation was essential in order to properly understand how to take care of the equipment, how to go over the parts of the stroke and the parts of the boat. By learning those skills before we got on the water, when the coach was referring to a certain part of the stroke, or even talking about the rigger, for example, or the oar, we were able to recognize and we knew what that meant, rather than just like putting us on the water and hoping that we would kind of catch on and figure it out as we went.
So I think you actually answered kind of my next question a little bit of, why were you working on some of these things? And if you could maybe talk a little bit about like where you're at as an athlete in terms of how has like the skill foundation helped you where you're currently at?
So I guess going over the basic skills such as like bobbing, rigger dips, circles, 360-degree turning the boat. Those are all very essential skills that I learned early on in my novice rowing career, and I still do to this day, whether it's in a new combination with somebody and I'm working on rowing with them, or just practicing my skills while waiting for the rest of the group to catch back up. These are little skills and drills that you can do that don't take much time or much room. Like, you can do them stationary, and they just help you develop your technique and your skills. So that's very important that you learn very early on.
Yeah, so just kind of comments of when Cassidy came into the Western program and I was able to watch her row, just like she has that skill set that we all look for. So good sense of balance, ability to be really athletic at both of the turns. So the catch and the finish, changing direction. It's boat comfort. She's just looks comfortable in the boat. So just kind of highlighting a couple things, just that putting the boat in and out of the water, creating routine. Every day you just kind of layer on one more piece. So there's a comfort and it's just built out. You can kind of develop little goals through competition. So, you know, if you're doing rigger depths, maybe you get to 20 on your first day, and then the goal is, you know, to get to 30 and get to 40. So you can really kind of develop the goals as you go. And then you can have a lot of fun with different things. So you can create your own competitions. You know, randomly one day it was like, okay, let's see if we can do push-ups in the boat. So we had the athletes, you know, figure out how to balance the boat to one side, and then they had to get their feet out, move, and it just encourages thinking. And the great part is when you're kind of working with newer athletes, a lot of the time they're like, there's no way I can do this. And then they figure out a way to make it happen. So that's really some of the type of learning that we want to do. So when we get those phrases of, I don't think I can do that, and then they do it, that's a really powerful thing. So I think there was one exercise that I asked you to highlight, Cass. Do you remember what that was?
Turning 360 degrees continuously.
Yes. So we got a question about shifting the ratio. So can you explain in a little more detail what you mean by shift the ratio? So we want to take the critical thinking of, you know, the coach lecturing the athlete and say, you must do this, you must do this, you must do this. And we want to put the athletes in situations where they are doing the critical thinking. So an example of this is when we're spinning in circles, and what we've been doing is timing how long it takes to turn the boat 360 degrees. So one side pulling, the other side backing. So you can do this in crews or in singles. So whereas if you're lecturing, you say, okay, you're going to pull with your left hand, you're going to push with your right hand. At the end, you're going to feather square. It takes a lot of steps to explain what that is. The way we can shift the ratio is by saying, okay, we want you to line up your stern with a point on the shore, turn the boat, we're going to time you to see how long it can take. And I want you to notice, when does the stern turn, and does it stop at any point? So if they mess up and they're a little clumsy with their handwork, that boat is going to stop. Or if they don't get the timing right between pulling and pushing, the boat's going to stop moving. And we want to say, as coaches, just watch the stern turn and make sure that it's moving continuously. So then the athlete starts to watch, okay, what am I doing? And does this result in the stern moving continuously around? Then when they go to row a little bit later on, they're watching the stern. So this was another thing that Max shared last week, is he wanted to watch the stern and see how it moves. So it's just a cue that the athlete needs to be aware of what is the boat doing. Okay, Cass, are you good with that? Okay, great. So we are just going to take a 1 minute. What are some basic skills that contribute to the principles that you've branched off of generating and maintaining boat speed? So Cass is gonna fill this in along with you. Okay, Cass, do you want to share what you've put together for that?
So for the maintaining boat speed on the recovery, two things that I highlighted was having open hands on the recovery. So like flattening your hand and not having it holding the oar. And also a drill that can be used with that one is just using your pointer finger and your thumb to square your oar. So that keeps your hands nice and relaxed, and that'll teach the athlete to not tense up so much on the recovery and have like a nice loose grip. And then for letting the boat run under you, one thing that I highlighted, which isn't really a drill, but more so just thinking, was pulling up on the toes on the recovery to help let the boat float towards the bow.
Right, so just a couple skills. So keeping the feet light through the recovery, probably something that we're working on while rowing, but maybe stationary. And then just kind of that exercise of doing maybe a roll up. So just moving through the recovery sequence with not actually gripping the oar, just keeping the hand on nice and straight. And even building off that is just even less control. So just one finger on the oar and just moving through and making sure that we have those skills like really, really good developed in the early stages. Okay. This is kind of a fun one for me. So I think we had a pretty good winter with Cassidy, and we had lots of conversations about what we were doing. So what were some of the things that we were working on with your rowing on the erg?
So specifically, I was working on getting my heels down quicker, or earlier. So I had the tendency to kind of push off my toes. So getting connected basically sooner at the catch, gradually driving. So making sure I wasn't kind of like grabbing the catch. So applying power gradually, being dynamic on the open. So I had a bit of a two-part drive where I would have the leg drive, and then after I would kind of bring the body in and rip it to the end. So we were working on that. And then also squeezing off the finish was a very big one for me. Just staying connected all the way to the end instead of letting the connection drop off earlier and losing that power towards the finish.
So for Cassidy, who really, really fit, really high skill, but just doesn't have like unlimited power to work from, we had to think about ways that we could squeeze everything out of her frame that we could. So one of the ways that we kind of got into this is we watched this video and had like a little bit of a dialogue back and forth about baseball swing mechanics. So Josh Donaldson does this video where he talks about, what is he thinking about in terms of his approach to the biomechanics of creating power through his baseball swing. So he highlights he's not a huge guy. He doesn't have a lot of power, but he's able to create easy power and high swing speed by coordinating his movements. So when we had this exercise with Cass, I asked her to highlight what are some of the similarities that you see with him talking about in this video, and how we can apply it to your rowing. And that's how we kind of settled on, you know, being a little bit more connected through the heels to activate the posterior chain, to make sure that we're loading the hips, and to make sure that there's continuous power, especially when we're at mid stroke and hitting peak force. We need to make sure that we're hitting peak force. It's not a like initial grab right off the catch and then it fades a little bit and then we have to pull at the finish. It's one big nice force curve. So that's a little bit about why. And then Cass, maybe just comment, you know, how did that help you?
I really liked being able to kind of relate the two videos, or the video to rowing, because it gave the ability to connect something that wasn't necessarily about rowing to something that we look at every day. So it was beneficial because it kind of connected how just basic movement patterns can be applied throughout all different sports, and how different sports are similar. So specifically, I really liked, he talks about stretching the kinetic chain and elasticity with his baseball swing and kind of winding up. And that can kind of be applied to rowing because of the catch and the finish. And when you're driving, the first part of the drive is like the stretch, and then you load and you follow through, which also connects to his point about easy power. So it was interesting and beneficial to see that you can look at something that you wouldn't think might have any connection to rowing, but very much does. So I very much enjoyed it.
Okay. And just in the interest of time, I think we'll kind of move on beyond like the integrate your coaching responsibilities. That can be a topic for another presentation as well. Anything else on that one, Cass? Okay. So we're just going to take maybe even less than a minute, maybe 30 seconds to write down kind of, is there anything from your life that you can incorporate into, you know, one of the level 3 or 4. So this is kind of the points that Cass had around, you know, letting the boat run underneath you, relaxation. Are there any metaphors from your life that you can contribute? So you want to add those into your coaching framework. So we're just going to give it about 20 seconds here. Okay. So now we want to get into what we were working on a little bit specifically in the pair, because that's where I was working with Cassidy and her pair partner, Elisa Bollinger. So what I'll do is I'll just pass it over to Cass, and she can kind of identify some things that she was working on with me and then with her varsity coach, Bob Ward.
So Elisa and I were a new combination this fall, and we came from fairly different backgrounds. So some of the things we were working on, which kind of goes back to our generating and maintain framework that we talked about earlier, was not disrupting the run of the boat when we put the blade in at the catch, applying power gradually throughout the drive. Specifically for our boat combination, we were working with timing together out of the finish and creating a platform, and then squeezing out the finish. So some of the drills that we did specifically to work on these were circles. So one at a time we each worked on doing a circle, we would gradually build it up. So we would start with arms only and then add up all the way to a full stroke. And it helped us with catch timing. It helped us with getting the balance of the boat and just different things that we needed to work on.
Sure. So just to kind of comment on that, we would go out and we would row for a period of time, just kind of get moving, find a little bit of groove in the pair, and then we would really break down. So we would go from this whole rowing, then we would do just parts of the stroke, components, and really refine our components of the stroke while still emphasizing the things that are in our framework. And then we would try and link back to the whole. So that would be also just one person rowing at a time, full strokes, and then try and bring that together. So there was a couple layers there. So we want to think about layered learning, and we want to think about whole part whole with the same sorts of emphasis during the whole and the part. So again, just kind of linking back, how can we shift the ratio to the athlete and critical thinking when we're doing drills? So we want to think about drills that allow the athlete to do the thinking. So when we were doing the circles, one of the things was when you start to load the foot stretcher and push or pull before the blade is loaded in the water, you'll notice that the boat just rocks to whichever side is rowing. So we want to set up the boat stable platform, nice and level, and allow one person to row. So if at the catch, the boat falls to that side, that's an indication that they haven't placed the blade in correctly. So as we were rowing along, it was, is the boat falling to your side at the catch? That means you need to change the way that you're putting the blade in the water. So it's no longer the coach telling you, okay, you need to lift up on your hands at this point in time. The athlete is doing the thinking and getting the feedback by what the boat is telling them. So it gets harder and harder as you go full slide. And eventually when you start to rotate out nice and long, you've got quite a bit of your mass, maybe just towards your rigger. So you really, really need to be accurate up at full slide about when is the blade going in the water and when is the push happening. So it was really, really good feedback, and they could feel, does that boat rock around? But once you set up the experience for the athlete, the coach no longer has to coach. The athlete is thinking about, is the boat falling to my side, and am I getting my timing right? And what you're going to do as a coach is just build this kind of like repertoire with the crew. So you want to think about what are the things that they need. And for Cassidy and Elisa, very fit, very strong. We just needed to get them to row together. So a lot of the drills that we were doing were specific to getting that timing right and the balance right to allow them to kind of flow along together. Okay, so we are going to just take, again, 30 seconds to think about what drills can you incorporate into your coaching that has an athlete think of themselves. It's not the coach coaching, it's where can the athlete develop for themselves. So we're just going to take 30 seconds on that. So again, we just want to branch out. What are the drills that contribute to kind of those level 3 or 4 points? So Cass, did you have anything written down for this one?
No, I can come up with something.
Sure. Maybe just take a couple seconds and if you got anything. What does your coaching framework look like right now? Okay, so we start to get a bit of a flow sheet. If you can just hold that back a little bit further. right? So we want to think about our central themes. We want to start to branch out, and then we want to incorporate how do we specifically get to access some of those principles of rowing. Okay, so just kind of in the last 2 minutes, and we'll give a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. Where do we draw inspiration from? So for me, like, I want to be excited when I go down to rowing to tell them about kind of the latest thing that I'm into. So it just creates a little bit of personal rapport with the athletes, and it's just an opportunity to connect with them as well. So for, how to talk to your athletes, I go back to interviews with like Matt Painter. He's the men's basketball coach at Purdue. So he just has a great demeanor, very specific, very targeted, very respectful of athletes and competition. So I try and model some of those concepts or values in my coaching. For developing power with athletes, again, I'm going back to this like Josh Donaldson baseball swing analogy. And it's just the easiest way that I can conceptualize and explain to the athletes, how do we deliver power? Training, there's just a podcast that I used to follow, but I haven't followed it in some time, but just Barbell Shrugged. So I'm, podcasts, books, real life examples, and then philosophy. There's a guy in the strength and conditioning community, Kelly Starrett, that's a really good, what are the principles that athletes need? So athletes need to be able to be self-sufficient and do it for themselves. And this idea of like, the shoulder and the hip only work in one real way. They deliver power in one way. So if you understand what is happening and what the intended goal is, you can take a narrow focus, so like rowing, and you become an expert in other areas because you understand what it is they're trying to accomplish. So this just philosophy piece is important. Like I said, books, peers, you have a conversation with the coach. You don't try and emulate that coach, but you try and take the concepts that they're working on and apply it to your own coaching practice. How do I implement this at my club? This is the wrong question to ask. You have the answer. We don't have the answer to that. You want to, again, not take any of the specific content from this about rowing, drills, etc. You want to think about developing your framework, and then how can you apply it in your club in different ways. Okay, and then just in summary, goals: develop your teaching methods. What is pedagogy? Continue to refine it. Find ways to connect with athletes in different ways. Develop your coaching framework. What is it that you're going to message to your athletes every single day that they can relate to, that's goal related? So hopefully around creating boat speed, you want to go fast. And then experiment and innovate in your daily practice and do it with purpose. So that's all that I kind of had for today. Just thanks to Cass and Colleen. We're going to stay on for a couple minutes just to do some Q&A if there are any questions. And just, again, I'd like to extend a thank you to some of the contributors of the content of this presentation. So Jordan Clark, and especially Eric Schultz. He's out there listening, I'm sure.
Thanks so much, Dane and Cassidy. If anybody has any questions, we're tight on time here. We've got a couple minutes. So do you want to just answer that one? Explain the shifting the ratios at the beginning, Dane?
Yeah.
And we'll wrap up.
So again, it's just this idea of who is doing the majority of the thinking. So if we are just lecturing our athletes, you need to do this, you need to do this. Well, the athlete is maybe doing a little bit of thinking in terms of, okay, I'm hearing information and then I'm executing on that. But that's the extent of the thinking. all of the thinking and the evaluating, is the boat going fast? What are the athletes doing? It's all done by the coach. And we want to shift that and make more experiences with our athletes. So we can just give maybe a general cue about what we're trying to accomplish, and then let the athletes develop themselves. And they don't have to be perfect from the start. They want to continue, you want to build it into your practice and start to layer in every day, maybe doing a certain drill, and see how they get better at it. But it's not about the instruction of the coach. It's more of let the athlete develop the concepts themselves.
A lot of good information from both of you today. I think, we have a comment here from David Gilmore saying how important this is in coach education. And I mean, the words that come to mind when I hear this, Dane and Cassidy, is just laying that foundation, developing that framework, and just being really patient with athlete development. And also that the athlete is part of the process, like Cassidy is part of the process. And I think it bodes well for athlete development in that, if they go to another coach, they have those skills to take with them, right? So, it's a logical approach, and it makes a lot of sense. So thank you so much. I think you're lucky to be coached by Dane, Cassidy. And what we're going to do is we will have this presentation on our site following. So you can catch it then. I'm sure many of you have more questions regarding this, but please give us your feedback as usual, and we will frame the presentations in the future that we will be doing every week. As well, Rowing Canada has an athlete development pathway, which is our updated LTAD framework. This is not exactly the framework Dane was talking about, but it shows basic principles that you would teach in those LTAD stages that Dane referred to. And from there you personalize it like Dane said. So that document as well will be attached with a link from this webinar. And please give your feedback. Next week we will have another webinar on the Thursday the 28th, but it will be at 12 o'clock Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So please just note that it will be again next Thursday, but 2 hours later. And we will announce tomorrow what that webinar will be. So once again, thank you very much. That was really insightful and great to hear from one of our NextGen athletes and NextGen coach. So thanks so much, Dane and Cassidy. Have a good week, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Colleen.
Thank you.